Welcome to today's deep dive. We're tackling an incredibly universal experience today. One that, honestly, anyone who has ever attempted to learn a second language is going to recognize immediately.
Oh, absolutely. It's that classic wall everyone hits.
Right. You sit down, you memorize the vocabulary, you drill the syntax, the grammar rules. You run through these conversational scenarios in your head until you feel like, you have absolute mastery over the material.
You're constructing perfect poetic sentences internally.
Exactly. And then the actual moment of truth arrives. You open your mouth to speak to a native speaker, and your articulatory system simply refuses to cooperate.
Yeah, it rebels.
Your tongue, your lips, your vocal cords, they all suddenly act as if they are operating on a completely different set of instructions, producing sounds that your brain is actively trying not to make.
And that dissonance,
Yeah.
that disconnect between your cognitive understanding and your physical articulation
Yeah.
is really one of the most persistent hurdles in language acquisition.
For sure.
Because your conscious brain might fully comprehend the assignment, right? But the neuromuscular pathways responsible for your speech have been deeply grooved by decades of producing a completely different language.
They're practically carved in stone at that point.
Exactly. Those native linguistic patterns are running continuously in the background. They function almost like an operating system that filters and modifies every new command you try to input. You're fighting against biological muscle memory just as much as you're fighting against foreign grammar.
Which brings us to the specific focus of today's analysis for you, the listener. We're looking at one of the most prominent, heavily researched, and honestly, frequently misunderstood examples of this physical pushback.
It's a fascinating one.
It really is. We are examining why native speakers of Romance languages, specifically Spanish, Portuguese, and French, almost universally default to adding an intrusive E sound to English words that begin with the letter S, followed by another consonant.
Saying things like school instead of school.
Right. Or a speak instead of speak, a start instead of start. It is a defining characteristic of the Romance language accent in English.
And it is remarkably persistent, even in advanced speakers who have otherwise mastered complex English vocabulary and syntax.
Yeah, I've noticed that. People with incredible fluency still do this.
All the time.
Yeah.
And the craziest part is the speaker is often entirely unaware that they are inserting this extra vowel.
Really? They don't even hear it.
They don't. The auditory filter of their native language is so robust that their brain genuinely perceives the output as a clean English word. It completely edits out the extra syllable they just physically produced. They don't hear the E because, according to the internal logic of their mother tongue, it's structurally required to be there just to make the sound combination perceivable.
That is wild. Well, we have an expensive stack of sources for today's deep dive to deconstruct the mechanics of this phenomenon.
We've got some great data to go through today.
We really do. We're pulling from some heavy linguistic research. We have a 2024 acoustic phonetic study by Luis Lopez from St. Cloud State University. This one provides some incredible visual data on the actual sound.
Right, the spectrogram stuff.
Yeah, exactly. We're also analyzing a comprehensive study from Repositorio PUCE that observed the bilingual development of high school students. Plus, we've got some critical perception data from the Yuva Dosi repository at the University of Valladolid comparing how different types of consonant clusters are processed.
But we aren't just staying in the lab with this one.
No, we're grounding this in practical application for you. We've pulled methodologies from ESL pronunciation guides via Bridge Universe, the Learn English Sounds platform, and we have applied strategies from expert tutors on Wisent and YouTube.
I love the diversity of these sources. It really allows us to approach the issue from multiple angles. We can look at the hardcore acoustic physics, the actual decibel levels and formants of the mouth, and then trace that data all the way down to boots on the ground pedagogical strategies.
It bridges that gap.
Exactly. The gap between understanding the theoretical linguistics of why the mouth rebels and applying actionable neuromuscular training to actually correct the pronunciation.
So, our mission for you, listening right now, is to completely demystify this process. By the end of this deep dive, you are going to understand the hidden acoustic laws that govern this specific mispronunciation.
And you'll see that the brain isn't just making a mistake.
Exactly. You'll see that the Spanish-speaking brain isn't making a careless error at all. It's actually executing a highly logical mathematical repair strategy. And then we're going to walk through the exact practical hacks you can use to rewire your articulatory system, bypass those native language filters, and produce a natural, clean English consonant cluster. Okay, let's let's unpack this. Let's start by defining the actual structural trigger for this issue, the SMUS cluster.
Right. To understand the mechanism behind the school phenomenon, we have to look at how syllables are constructed in the first place. In phonology, an S cluster, frequently referred to as an S blend in the ESL literature, is a sequence where the letter S occurs at the absolute beginning of a word.
The onset of the syllable.
Precisely. And it's immediately followed by one or more additional consonants, without any intervening vowel to separate them.
Looking at the English lexicon, these clusters are everywhere. They are ubiquitous. The sources break them down into several common categories. You have your two consonant clusters, like SPI, in words such as speak, sport, and spend.
Or the S clusters in stop, street, and student.
Yeah. And you have the SCUC clusters, whether spelled with a C or a K, in words like school, skill, and scan. But English phonotactics are notoriously permissive, right? They allow for even denser combinations. We regularly string three consonants together at the onset of a word.
Oh, the three consonant clusters present an even more aggressive phonetic environment.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Think about words like strong with the store sequence, or
Mm.
splash with spacel, even scream with restore.
Right.
For a native English speaker, transitioning through three distinct consonant articulations before ever reaching the vowel nucleus of the syllable feels entirely natural. The neuromuscular timing is deeply ingrained.
But from a cross-linguistic perspective.
Particularly when compared to Romance languages, clustering consonants this densely at the beginning of a word is an extreme phonetic anomaly.
So when a Spanish speaker encounters these dense vowelless clusters, their articulatory system essentially throws an error code.
That's a great way to put it.
The research from the PUCE study identifies the resulting physical reaction as epenthesis. Let's break down the mechanics of that specific phonological term.
Sure. Epenthesis is a structural repair strategy. It's utilized by the brain when it encounters a sound sequence that violently violates the phonotactic constraints of its native language.
And when this happens at the beginning of a word,
Linguists sometimes refer to it specifically as prothesis. But functionally, it is the involuntary insertion of an extra phoneme, almost always a vowel.
okay,
It inserts this vowel into a word to break up an Lisp consonant cluster and force it into a legal, pronounceable syllable structure.
I just love that concept of a repair strategy. It's a fascinating way to frame it. The speaker's brain scans the English word stop, recognizes that an initial combination violates the foundational laws of its native sound system, and immediately deploys a vowel to act as a buffer.
It turns a one-syllable violation into a two-syllable compliance.
Exactly. And the historical context here as a crucial layer of understanding. This isn't just some modern difficulty with English, it's a structural reality that evolved over millennia.
It really is. In the transition from Vulgar Latin to the modern Romance languages, a massive phonological shift occurred regarding the letters es followed by a consonant. Linguists call it the S impure.
The SM.
Yes. Latin words that began with these clusters gradually became unstable. The speakers of early Spanish, Portuguese, and French naturally began prefixing an E sound to these words just to ease the articulation.
And our sources highlight the remnants of that historical shift perfectly. The Latin word sculla evolved into the modern Spanish word escuela.
Yes, and the English word special, which shares the same root, is especial in Spanish.
Student equates to estudiante. The architecture of the language simply adapted to forbid the bare cluster over time.
We see the exact same phonological evolution in Portuguese, where school translates to escola.
And even in French, the evolutionary path is totally visible, right? Though it's slightly different. The intrusive E was added, and then over centuries, the es itself often went silent or dropped out entirely.
Right, turning a word like the old French école into the modern école.
Which means that for a native Spanish speaker today, the rule is absolute. No word in their entire lexicon begins with an S followed by another consonant. It is a phonetic impossibility within their linguistic framework.
They don't exist.
So when they attempt to speak English, they're battling a millennium of linguistic evolution that has hardwired their brain to perceive the self cluster as fundamentally broken.
And the PUCE research points to another compounding factor here. Beyond just historical phonotactics, it has to do with orthography.
The spelling, right, how the written language maps onto spoken sounds.
Exactly. The study notes that Spanish is a highly transparent phonetic language. It possesses roughly 24 graphemes, the written letters that correspond directly and consistently to 24 phones, the actual units of sound.
So what you see is what you get.
100%. That direct one-to-one correspondence between grapheme and phone creates a deep sense of orthographic trust in the Spanish speaker's brain.
Orthographic trust. I like that phrase.
Yeah, when they see a specific letter in Spanish, they know precisely what acoustic value it holds, regardless of its position in the word. The rules of pronunciation are rigid, they're predictable, and they are exceptionally reliable.
Which stands in stark contrast to English. I mean, English relies on 26 graphemes to represent a sprawling, often chaotic inventory of 44 to 45 different phones. The mapping is totally opaque.
The opacity of English orthography creates immense friction for the adult learner. A Spanish speaker approaches a written English word expecting the letters to behave logically. They expect them to follow the transparent rules they've known since childhood.
Naturally.
So when they see the letters S and P at the beginning of speak, their neural pathways flag the sequence as structurally impossible without a preceding vowel. The brain overextends the native rule system into the foreign language. It actively inserts the E, not just because it's physically hard to say, but because the brain fundamentally believes the vowel must be there for the word to be valid.
It's just trying to fix a typo, essentially. I think we need to address the practical implications of this for you, the listener, from a purely functional standpoint. If someone says, I need to go to the store to buy an S smartphone, the intelligibility of the sentence remains relatively intact, right?
Oh, definitely. A native English listener can easily parse the meaning.
So why does this specific instance of penthesis receive so much focus in accent reduction coaching and ESL literature? Why is it such a big deal if they just want to be understood?
Well, while baseline intelligibility might survive the insertion of that epenthetic vowel, the broader mechanics of the sentence do not. The issue at play here is a concept known as bisyllabism.
Bisyllabism?
Yeah, and how it directly interferes with the overarching rhythm and prosody of the English language. Adding that intrusive E does far more than just alter the initial sound. It completely changes the syllable count of the word.
Let's use the word school to map out that syllable change.
Okay. In standard English phonology, school is a single tightly bound syllable. It is a single rhythmic beat.
Right, school, one beat.
But when the epenthetic vowel is applied, the word morphs into e-school.
2 beats.
Exactly. The single beat has now been fractured into 2 distinct syllables. You have forced bisyllabism onto a monosyllabic word. Now, if you extrapolate that across an entire sentence, say, the student walked down the street to the school, the speaker has unwittingly added 3 entirely new rhythmic beats to the phrase.
The musicality of the language gets completely rewritten. The sources contrast this by explaining the difference between stress-timed and syllable-timed languages. English operates as a stress-timed language.
Right.
The rhythm of an English sentence is driven by the heavily stressed syllables, which occur at somewhat regular intervals. Meanwhile, the unstressed syllables in between are compressed, they're reduced, and they're rushed just to maintain the overarching beat.
Conversely, Spanish is a syllable-timed language. In Spanish prosody, every single syllable, whether it's stressed or unstressed, receives roughly the same amount of time, weight, and acoustic space.
It produces a very even staccato rhythm.
Yes. It's often compared to the firing of a machine gun, whereas English is compared to the irregular tapping of Morse code. So when a Spanish speaker inserts these extra epenthetic syllables into an English sentence, they inherently give those new syllables the full weight and timing of a Spanish vowel.
Which fundamentally derails the stress-timed rhythm the English listener is subconsciously expecting.
It creates significant cognitive load for the listener. Even if the English speaker immediately understands the vocabulary, their brain has to dedicate extra processing power to decode the disrupted rhythmic pattern.
And over the course of a long conversation, that's going to add up.
It leads to listener fatigue.
Well,
It also inadvertently makes the non-native speaker sound hesitant, slower, or less fluent than their actual vocabulary and grammar level would indicate.
there is also a strictly physiological component to this rhythmic disruption that is incredibly compelling. It involves the mechanical operation of the vocal cords themselves.
Yes.
Because the S fasum is a voiceless sound.
To produce a voiceless S, the vocal folds within your larynx are pulled apart. This allows air from the lungs to pass through the glottis unimpeded. You're creating friction against the alveolar ridge without any vibration at all. It is a pure breath sound.
Just air.
Right. Vowels, however, are inherently voiced. To produce the epenthetic E, the vocal folds must be brought tightly together to vibrate against the airflow.
So the physical mechanics are essentially fighting each other. By placing a voiced vowel immediately before a voiceless consonant cluster, the speaker is prematurely igniting the vocal cords.
The speaker is turning the motor on before the vehicle is supposed to move.
Exactly.
This premature voicing throws off the intricate millisecond-level timing required for smooth articulation. The vocal cords have to vibrate for the E, immediately stop vibrating for the S, and then potentially start vibrating again for the following consonant or vowel.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It creates a jagged, inefficient physical transition that requires immense effort to execute, which further drags down the fluency of the sentence. What's fascinating here is that when we look at the acoustic data, we realize the Spanish-speaking brain isn't just making a haphazard, clumsy error. It is fiercely, precisely defending a set of invisible laws governing acoustic physics.
Yes. The research from Luis Lopez's phonetic study at St. Cloud State University transitions us away from general linguistic theory and right into the hard science of syllable phonotactics.
The Lopez study completely reframes the conversation.
We tend to view language as a collection of cultural idioms and grammatical rules. But Lopez's data demonstrates that language is equally bound by mathematical formulas and acoustic resonance. The study specifically analyzes why these 6 clusters trigger such an aggressive repair strategy.
The structural foundation of the study points out that both English and Spanish actually permit complex onsets. They both allow multiple consonants to begin a syllable.
Right, Spanish contains plenty of words starting with prima, like premio, or like trabajo.
Exactly. The discrepancy arises because Spanish syllable construction is governed by incredibly strict, non-negotiable phonotactic laws, whereas English permits combinations that push the absolute limits of acoustic tolerance.
Lopez outlines 3 specific rules that govern the Spanish mouth. Let's dig into rule number 1, the minimal sonority distance principle, or the MSDP. We need to clearly define what sonority is in this context because Lopez applies it as a strict mathematical value rather than just a general concept of loudness.
In acoustic phonetics, sonority refers to the relative acoustic resonance or carrying power of a sound compared to other sounds. It's essentially a measure of how much acoustic energy is released during the articulation.
Okay.
Vowels, naturally, possess the highest level of sonority because the vocal tract is open, allowing maximal airflow and vibration. Consonants possess lower sonority. But crucially, different classes of consonants have distinctly different sonority values based on how severely they restrict the airflow.
So the minimal sonority distance principle establishes a rigid threshold for how close 2 sounds can be in their resonance levels if they are placed next to each other in a cluster.
Yes. According to Spanish phonotactics, the MSDP dictates that any 2 consonants forming a cluster at the beginning of a syllable must be separated by a minimum of 3 decibels in their intrinsic sonority values.
3 decibels.
There has to be a substantial, clearly audible gap in resonance between the 2 sounds. If that 3 decibel gap does not exist, the cluster is rejected as illegal by the native speaker's brain.
It's an acoustic buffer zone. If the sounds are too similar in their energy output, they bleed into one another, and the Spanish brain considers the sequence a failure of clarity.
Now compare that strict 3 decibel requirement to the reality of English clusters. If we look at the standard sonority scale used in phonetics, the fricative SAC carries a sonority index value of roughly 12 decibels.
12 decibels for the S.
Right. And if we look at the stop consonants that frequently follow it in English, the T in stop, the P in speak, or the K in school, those sounds carry a sonority index value of roughly 11 decibels.
The friction here is immediately obvious. The S sits at 12 decibels, and the following consonant sits at 11 decibels. The sonority distance between them is a mere 1 decibel.
Exactly, it's a 1 decibel gap. English phonotactics are flexible enough to tolerate that incredibly tight acoustic space. The English speaker's ear and mouth have been trained to navigate it.
But when the Spanish speaker encounters the word stop,
their auditory processing system registers a critical violation of the minimal sonority distance principle. The 1 decibel gap falls drastically short of the required 3 decibel buffer. The sounds are mathematically too close together.
So it fixes it.
To rectify this structural failure, the brain automatically deploys a high sonority vowel, the epenthetic E, to break the consonants apart. It forcefully restores acoustic order and fulfills the mathematical requirements of the native language.
The fact that the insertion of the vowel is driven by a subconscious calculation of decibel gaps is astonishing to me. It completely removes the stigma of lazy pronunciation. It replaces it with a picture of a highly efficient cognitive system enforcing its parameters.
It really is a marvel of the brain.
That brings us to rule number 2 in Lopez's framework, the sonority sequence principle, or SSP.
The sonority sequence principle dictates the overarching acoustic shape of a glow-formed syllable. The principle mandates that within a syllable, sonority must steadily and sequentially rise as you move from the initial consonants toward the vowel.
Because the vowel is the peak.
Right, the vowel serves as the high resonance nucleus or peak of the syllable, and then the sonority must sequentially fall as you move away from the vowel toward the end of the word.
It requires a symmetrical acoustic curve. The consonants should act as gradual steps leading up to the peak resonance of the vowel.
The metaphor of climbing a mountain is frequently used in phonology to illustrate the SSP. The vowel is the absolute summit of the mountain. The initial consonants in the onset are the foothills.
Okay, I can picture that.
To have a legally constructed syllable, every step you take must be upward. Every consonant must have a higher sonority value than the one preceding it, building energy until you reach the peak.
Let's apply that mountain climbing framework to the English word star. The speaker begins with the S, which we've established sits at a sonority level of 12.
Yep.
The next step is the t sound, which drops down to a sonority level of 11. Only after that drop does the speaker hit the vowel A and spike up to the peak resonance.
The English word star forces the speaker to take a step downward in sonority before they're allowed to climb to the peak. You start at 12, drop into an acoustic valley at 11, and then ascend.
And in the rigid framework of Spanish phonotactics, stepping down the sonority mountain before reaching the summit is a blatant violation of the sonority sequence principle.
Like total violation.
So how does the Spanish language resolve that violation when the same root word appears in his own lexicon?
The Spanish word estar, meaning to be, provides the perfect structural resolution. By adding the initial E, the word is fractured into two distinct syllables, ease and tar.
I see.
This brilliant maneuver creates two separate sonority mountains. In the first syllable, E, the sonority peaks immediately on the E and correctly falls on the S coda.
It goes up, then down.
Yes. And in the second syllable, tar, the sonority starts low on the T and correctly rises to the A peak. The mathematical violation is entirely erased by the epenthetic vowel.
The English cluster creates a jagged, illegal acoustic curve, and the Spanish brain essentially edits the waveform by injecting a new syllable nucleus.
Exactly.
Let's move to rule number 3, which shifts away from pure acoustics and focuses heavily on the physical geography of the mouth. The obligatory contour principle, or OCP.
The obligatory contour principle acts as a safeguard against articulatory traffic jams. It states that a syllable onset cannot be constructed using continuous adjacent segments that share the exact same place of articulation within the vocal tract.
So you can't use the same part of the mouth twice in a row.
Right, you cannot demand that the tongue rapidly strike the exact same anatomical location twice in a row to produce two different sounds in a single cluster.
This principle specifically explains why the Spanish speaker struggles with clusters that don't involve harsh stops, such as the slel in sleep or the slez in snake.
Precisely. If we map out the articulation of the cell cluster, we find that the cell fricative is produced by bringing the blade of the tongue into extreme proximity with the alveolar ridge.
That's the bony protrusion located on the roof of the mouth, just behind the upper incisors, right?
That's the one. And the L consonant is a lateral approximant, which is also produced by making direct contact with that exact same alveolar ridge.
So demanding that the tongue execute a complex fricative sound and an immediate lateral sound on the identical piece of palatal real estate violates the obligatory contour principle.
It's too much traffic in one spot.
The Spanish brain views this anatomical bottleneck as unmanageable and, once again, inserts the epenthetic E to force the S and the L into completely separate syllables. It gives the tongue time to reset its position.
Exactly.
While these rules dictate that all clusters are fundamentally illegal in Spanish, the data from the Uvidox study at the University of Valladolid adds a critical layer of nuance. The study proves that not all violations are treated equally by the brain.
The physical struggle to pronounce the word varies wildly depending on the specific consonant that follows the S.
The Valladolid study provides an exceptional data set. They categorize the English ses clusters into two distinct phonetic classes, continuant clusters and stop clusters, and then they measured the successful pronunciation rates of Spanish learners.
Let's delineate those categories clearly. A continuant cluster features an S, followed by a consonant that allows for a continuous, uninterrupted flow of air. The sound can be stretched or hummed indefinitely.
Examples include the sesism in small, the second in snake, the second in sleep, or the swu in swim.
Right. A stop cluster, conversely, features an S followed by a plosive consonant. This is a sound that requires a complete, momentary blockage of all airflow in the vocal tract before a sudden release.
This includes the spen in speak, the spen in stop, and the skiing in school.
And the results of their reading tests in the UVidoc study were dramatically polarized.
I found this part so interesting. When the Spanish students attempted to read words with continuant clusters, the smooth, stretching sounds like small, they achieved an 82% success rate.
82%?
They were able to suppress the epenthetic E and produce a clean English onset 82% of the time. However, when confronted with the stop clusters, the harsh blocking sounds like school, their success rate collapsed to a mere 34%.
A nearly 50% drop in articulatory success simply based on the secondary consonant.
Why such a massive discrepancy?
The rationale lies in the severity of the physical transition required. Continuant sounds like M or W are acoustically and physically proximate to vowels. Because they maintain continuous airflow and are often voiced, the articulatory transition from the voiceless hissing S into the continuant is relatively fluid.
The mouth is essentially sliding from one continuous state to another.
Yes, the friction of the movement is minimized, but the stop clusters demand an incredibly jarring sequence of physical states.
So with the word like school, the articulatory system must initiate a continuous, voiceless fricative, immediately slam the vocal tract completely shut with the velar te sound, halt all airflow, and then violently explode that blockage directly into a voiced high-sonority vowel.
It is a jagged, abrupt, and highly demanding sequence of neuromuscular commands. The harshness of the physical blockage in the stop cluster overwhelms the Spanish speaker's articulatory confidence. It triggers a panic response in the brain.
And so the epenthetic E is deployed as a mandatory safety cushion to stabilize the abrupt physical transition.
Precisely. The data from Luis Lopez's acoustic analysis corroborates this perfectly. Among all the vocabulary words tested in his study, the word small exhibited the absolute lowest rate of epenthesis.
Because the bilabial nasal is a continuant, it represents the path of least resistance.
Right. It is the mildest possible violation of the Spanish phonotactic rules, allowing the speaker to occasionally slip through without triggering the vowel repair.
Yeah.
Whereas school, featuring the harsh velar stop, represents an acoustic worst-case scenario.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We have spent the last half hour referring to this intrusive repair sound as an E, an A, or a phantom vowel. But in the realm of hard science, assumptions are useless. What exactly is the acoustic identity of this inserted sound?
Right. If we strip away our subjective hearing and put this phenomenon under an acoustic microscope, what are the speakers actually producing?
This is perhaps the most brilliant contribution of the Lopez study. Historically, ESL pedagogy and even linguistic literature often dismiss the epenthetic sound as a generic, centralized schwa. A lazy, almost accidental puff of breath that escaped while the speaker was struggling to find the consonant.
But Lopez discarded that assumption entirely. He recorded native Spanish speakers attempting these clusters, digitized the audio, and ran it through Pratt.
For our listeners unfamiliar with the specific tools of linguistics, Pratt is an advanced software program used for phonetic speech analysis. It takes a raw audio recording and generates a visual spectrogram.
And it's a highly detailed map charting the frequencies, intensity, and duration of sound waves over time.
By analyzing the spectrograms, Lopez was able to mathematically isolate the exact physical characteristics of the phantom vowel. To do this, he measured the formants of the sound wave.
Formants are essentially concentrations of acoustic energy at specific frequencies, and they directly correlate to the physical shape the vocal tract assumes to produce a sound. Specifically, he measured the F1 and F2 formants.
The mapping of F1 and F2 is how phoneticians determine exactly what a person's mouth is doing without ever having to look at their face. Let's break those down. F1, the first formant, directly corresponds to mouth aperture.
The vertical drop of the jaw.
Right. A high F1 frequency indicates a wide-open jaw, like an ah sound, while a low F1 indicates a nearly closed jaw, like an E sound.
And the F2, the second formant, corresponds to the horizontal position of the tongue body. A high F2 frequency indicates the tongue is pushed far forward in the mouth, close to the teeth. A low F2 indicates the tongue is retracted toward the back of the throat.
So by pinpointing the exact Hertz frequencies of F1 and F2, Lopez could plot the phantom vowel's precise location on a phonetic chart.
The specific Hertz measurements he extracted are revealing. He separated the data by gender to account for general physiological differences in vocal tract size.
Let's hear the numbers.
For the female participants, the mean frequency for F1 was 524 Hz, and the mean for F2 was 2014 Hz. For the male participants, the F1 mean was 461 hertz, and the F2 was 1786 hertz.
Okay, when you plot those specific Hertz coordinates on an acoustic vowel space chart, the results are definitive. A frequency of roughly 500 Hertz for F1 indicates a mid-level jaw drop. The mouth is neither fully open nor tightly closed, but suspended exactly in the middle.
And the high F2 frequencies of 1700 to 2000 hertz indicate a distinctly fronted tongue position.
The combination of a mid-level jaw drop and a fronted tongue unequivocally identifies the sound as the phonetic E, the mid-front unrounded vowel.
It is the exact same vowel sound found in the Spanish word tres, or the English word face.
The Pratt software also provided crucial data regarding the intensity and duration of the sound. This was not a fleeting microscopic error. The epenthetic vowel registered an incredibly loud intensity, averaging between 67 and 68 decibels.
Furthermore, the duration of the vowel lasted anywhere from 84.5 to 100 milliseconds.
The implications of those numbers are profound. A 68 decibel sound lasting 100 milliseconds is a massive, fully realized phonetic event.
It proves that the Spanish speaker is not just letting out an accidental puff of air due to articulatory hesitation. The native language operating system in their brain is orchestrating a deliberate, full-blown articulatory insertion.
In the fraction of a second before speaking, the brain calculates the sonority violation. It commands the jaw to open to a precise mid-level height. It thrusts the tongue forward to the exact required millimeter, and it fires the vocal cords at 68 decibels to place a massive, flawless Spanish vowel directly onto the English word.
It is a testament to how deeply programmed and intentional this phonological repair strategy is.
The cognitive processing required to execute that repair sequence in milliseconds is staggering. The human brain is a terrifyingly efficient machine when it comes to defending its linguistic parameters.
Absolutely.
However, as brilliant as the native language operating system is, our goal is to help you, the listener, outsmart it. It is time for a mission shift. We have established the theoretical linguistics, the acoustic physics, and the specific anatomy of the school phenomenon. Now we must transition to actionable solutions.
How does an adult learner actively override decades of neuromuscular conditioning to sound more natural?
This is where pedagogical theory meets physical therapy. Intellectualizing the sonority rules won't miraculously stop the tongue from inserting the vowel. The learner must engage in targeted, repetitive drills designed to carve new neuromuscular pathways.
And our sources from the ESL teaching community have provided a highly effective, multifaceted toolkit to dismantle the epenthesis habit.
We will systematically walk through these strategies. Let's begin with hack number 1, which attacks the problem purely at the level of physical coordination. This methodology is heavily featured in the Bridge Universe Lesson Plan by Lorena Siegel and is a staple technique on platforms like the Learn English Sounds blog.
It is commonly referred to as the hissing start, or in younger classrooms, Stacy the Snake.
The hissing start is a classic, highly effective physiological isolation technique. It forces the speaker to decouple the problematic consonant sequence and build it back up piece by piece.
The execution of the drill is straightforward, but requires intense focus. The speaker does not attempt to say the full word immediately. Instead, they isolate the initial S and elongate it into a continuous, aggressive snake hiss. They heard that pure, voiceless sound for several seconds.
Then, while maintaining the hiss, they slowly and deliberately introduce the secondary consonant.
Sp. Only after successfully linking the two consonants without a break do they append the remainder of the word peak.
Through extensive repetition, the speaker gradually compresses the duration of the initial hiss until it replicates a natural conversational onset. Stop. Speak.
To understand why this drill is so potent, we must revisit the mechanics of the vocal cords. The intrusive epenthetic E is a voice vowel, meaning it requires immediate vocal fold vibration.
And the S is a voiceless fricative, requiring the folds to remain open and still.
By forcing the learner to sustain that elongated sound, the drill acts as a physical override for the larynx.
The learner is actively forcing their vocal cords to remain locked in the off position.
Because they are continuously exhaling a voiceless airstream, it becomes anatomically impossible for the voiced vowel to infiltrate the sequence.
The continuous hiss essentially constructs a wall of voiceless air that the phantom vowel cannot penetrate.
It trains the articulatory muscles to tolerate the voiceless state right up until the release of the stop consonant. It effectively starves the epenthetic vowel of the vibration it needs to exist.
It is localized physical therapy for the vocal tract. You are forcing the muscles to unlearn their dependency on the vowel buffer. which brings us to hack number 2. This shifts the approach from physical isolation to cognitive reframing. This strategy is championed by expert ESL tutors, notably Estrella C on the Wisent platform. We are calling it the mental psi substitution.
The C substitution is a brilliant application of psychological anchoring. It recognizes that the sight of an English cluster induces a momentary panic in the Spanish speaker's pattern recognition software.
The methodology requires the speaker to fundamentally change how they perceive the written word. When approaching an English word like stop, the tutor instructs the student not to focus on the isolated letters as.
Instead, the student is trained to mentally visualize and associate the beginning of the English word with the highly common Spanish word sí, which translates to yes.
The psychological mechanics of this hack are deeply elegant. When the Spanish brain encounters a standalone es followed by a stop consonant, it registers a structural failure and scrambles to insert the repair vowel.
However, the word sí is a perfectly legal, heavily ingrained component of the Spanish lexicon. The speaker's articulatory system knows precisely how to execute the word sí. It begins with a sharp, clean, vowel-free secative before transitioning into the I vowel.
By mentally whispering the word see in the microsecond before articulating the English word, the speaker is tricking their own brain.
They are executing a neuromuscular bait and switch. The mental visualization of psi creates a familiar, safe landing pad for the tongue. It primes the articulators to initiate a pure es sequence based on a native language command, rather than panicking over an unfamiliar English command.
The speaker is effectively weaponizing the architecture of their native language to bypass its own phonotactic filters.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of syllable phonotactics that we established earlier, hack number 3 stands out as the most mathematically elegant solution to the epenthesis problem.
This strategy is detailed on the ESLAN YouTube channel with corroborating theory from the Bridge Universe curriculum. We are calling it the push-together visual trick, or exploiting the epenthesis loophole.
It doesn't fight the Spanish phonological rules. It simply exploits a massive loophole within them.
The premise of the trick relies on identifying the exact location of the violation. The Spanish brain only mandates the epenthetic vowel when the S is located at the beginning of the word in the onset position.
The hack involves mentally and visually shifting the S so that it no longer occupies that illegal position. Instead, the speaker visually detaches the S from the target word and glues it to the end of the preceding word in the sentence.
The specific example provided in the ESLAN curriculum perfectly illustrates the mechanics of this shift. Consider the English sentence, "I can't stop speaking Spanish."
That sentence is an absolute minefield for a Romance language speaker. It contains 3 consecutive clusters. Stop speaking Spanish.
If a Spanish speaker attempts to read that sentence sequentially, their phonological repair system will trigger 3 separate times, resulting in, "I can't stop speaking Spanish." The rhythm is utterly destroyed.
The push-together hack fundamentally rewrites the visual parsing of the sentence. The learner is instructed to mentally detach the es from stop and append it to the word can't. The first cognitive chunk becomes, I can't stop.
I can't stop.
They then detach the s from speaking and append it to the remaining top. The second cognitive chunk becomes top speaking.
Top speaking.
Finally, they detach the es from Spanish and append it to the remaining peaking. The final chunk is peaking Spanish.
When you string those entirely new, reconstructed chunks together in your mind's eye, you get a bizarre-looking sequence. I can't stop picking Spanish. But when you read that bizarre sequence aloud at a normal conversational cadence, the acoustic output is a flawless, native-sounding English sentence. I can't stop speaking Spanish.
The question is, why does the Spanish brain accept can't stop without launching a 68 decibel repair vowel?
The loophole lies in the distinction between a syllable onset and a syllable coda. The entirety of the minimal sonority distance principle and the rigid Spanish phonotactic rules we discussed apply strictly to the onset, the beginning of a syllable.
However, the Spanish brain has zero structural issue with the letters es sitting in the coda position, the very end of a syllable. In fact, words ending in es are incredibly prevalent in Spanish, serving as primary markers for plural nouns like las and dos, or verb conjugations like hablas.
The coda position is a phonotactically safe zone for the letters es.
Precisely. By visually and mentally dragging the es backward and attaching it to the preceding word, the speaker forcefully evicts the consonant from the illegal onset position and relocates it into the perfectly legal coda position.
The brain processes the "es" as the final sound of the first word, rather than the initial sound of a forbidden cluster.
Because the neurological trigger, the illegal onset, has been visually eliminated, the alarm never sounds, the sonority violation is avoided, and the epenthetic E is never authorized for insertion.
It is a phenomenal workaround. You are simply redrawing the boundaries of the words to placate the native language's mathematical requirements. You can apply this universally across conversational English. He goes to school becomes he goes to school. She likes to speak becomes she likes to speak. By compressing the space between the words, the clusters vanish.
While these physical and cognitive tricks are highly effective in isolated drills, our sources universally stress that they won't translate into spontaneous conversational fluency without a foundational shift in how the learner processes audio. This brings us to hack number 4, active listening and ear training.
The Wyzant tutoring data places heavy emphasis on this step. You cannot permanently alter your speech production until you have drastically upgraded your speech perception.
As we established with the spectrogram data, the Spanish speaker's auditory processing system actively deletes the epenthetic vowel from their conscious perception. They literally hear themselves producing a perfect English school, even while acoustically emitting S school.
The native language filter is modifying the reality of their own voice.
Therefore, before the mouth can be permanently rewired, the ear must be aggressively recalibrated.
The learner has to intentionally tune their auditory perception to the specific frequency of the missed vowel.
The pedagogical recommendation is to engage in hyper-focused active listening sessions using native English audio podcasts, audiobooks, or interviews. The goal is not listening for vocabulary comprehension, but hunting exclusively for initial clusters.
The learner must actively analyze how the native English speaker transitions out of silence or out of a preceding word directly into the voiceless fricative S without any preliminary voicing.
They have to train their brain to recognize the stark, abrupt acoustic reality of an English cluster. Once the auditory cortex has been trained to detect the pure, vowelless onset in external sources, it will finally begin to flag the intrusive E when the learner produces it themselves. Awareness is the absolute prerequisite for correction.
So what does this all mean? Let's bring this deep dive home and synthesize the massive amount of data we've covered today. We began by acknowledging the intense frustration of the "school" and "speak" phenomenon, that paralyzing moment when your tongue refuses to follow your brain's instructions.
But by unpacking the hard science, we've completely reframed the narrative. The insertion of that extra vowel is not an indicator of a lazy tongue, poor mimicry, or a lack of linguistic aptitude.
In reality, it signifies the exact opposite. The phenomenon proves that the speaker's brain is an incredibly sophisticated, highly efficient acoustic processor that is relentlessly enforcing the deep structural laws of its native language.
The Spanish-speaking brain is performing complex background calculations in milliseconds, measuring sonority gaps in decibels, mapping out allowable sequences of resonance, and policing the anatomical traffic on the alveolar ridge, all to protect the structural integrity of the syllables the speaker has relied upon since childhood.
The friction only occurs because English phonotactics are chaotic and permissive, allowing for aggressive consonant combinations that the Romance language operating system fundamentally rejects as mathematically unsound. But we also know that you are not hopelessly bound by those native parameters.
By utilizing targeted hacks like the Stacy the Snake hissing drill to paralyze the vocal cords, the Wyzant C substitution to trick the neuromuscular pathways, and the brilliant epenthesis loophole to visually slide the S into a legal coded position, you can actively override the autopilot, bypass the sonority alarms, and produce a flawless, natural English cadence.
And exploring the mechanics of that override leaves us with a truly profound, slightly provocative implication to consider. We have spent this entire session deconstructing how your mother tongue acts as a literal, physical filter on your reality.
It is a biological operating system that has the power to physically manipulate your jaw, thrust your tongue, and ignite your vocal cords at 68 decibels, entirely without your conscious consent,
Okay.
simply because a foreign sound violated an arbitrary mathematical rule concerning acoustic resonance.
You likely lived your entire life entirely unaware that the minimal sonority distance principle even existed. And yet your physical body obeyed its 3 decibel mandate flawlessly every single time you spoke.
Discovering the exact mathematical parameters that secretly control your speech is like finding the underlying code to your own matrix.
It forces a broader, more philosophical question. If the language you happen to be born into possesses the hidden power to physically alter your neuromuscular movements and censor the sounds you produce without you ever knowing it, What other invisible rules embedded in your native culture are silently scripting your behavior?
What other profound filters are operating in the background, subtly modifying how you process information, how you construct your reality, and how you interact with the world around you every single day?
That is an incredibly powerful concept to leave on. Are we all just constantly inserting our own cultural and cognitive epenthesis into every interaction, modifying the raw data of the world just to make it fit the specific patterns we were programmed to expect? That is absolutely something to chew on as you go about your day. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you walk away feeling empowered by the phonetic science, armed with the practical hacks to conquer those dense clusters, and possessing a newfound respect for the mathematical brilliance of your own brain. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep pushing the boundaries of your learning, and maybe, just for today, practice talking like a snake. We will see you next time.